Hi everyone, my name is Paul Kirby. Welcome to the CurbyMcLintock Coffee Break series on the Insider Threat, your staff. I'm joined today with my colleague Scott McLintock. Scott, what did you want to talk about today?
Yeah, I thought fraud and corruption risk from your employees is probably something that our listeners might be interested in, given like the number of clients that we've had of late that have come forward and sort of help in that regard. I think, COVID has sort of presented a whole new level or a whole new range of risks, and I think it's apparent that employees are potentially minded to look for other avenues of income when they're feeling their job security is threatened.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a culture. Organisational culture needs to be thought about. The old adage of trust but verify is the maxim really that I've heard over the last 30 years, and being able to walk into an organisation and get that sense that you can ask a staff member a question or ask them to be accountable for a particular transaction that's been made, and they're happy to provide that.
Yeah.
So,
and I think what we've also seen is staff or employees who might not have otherwise taken advantage of weaknesses in controls, because let's face it, there are always weaknesses in control. You can never always manage out all risks or mitigate against all risks of misconduct happening. But I think what we're seeing now, and sort of refer to the fraud triangle, which many people would have heard of, which is, there's three components that need to be present for a fraud to take place, and those being, opportunity, which is essentially weaknesses in control, your rationalisation, I didn't get a bonus last year, or I got a 20% pay cut during COVID, so I need to, I'm entitled to this money. Or the motivational aspect, which is, I don't know if I'm going to have a job in 6 to 12 months. I'm just going to sort of bank a bit now so I can pay my mortgage and make sure that my family is okay. And so I think in the COVID environment, the impetus around the motivation has increased. There's so much uncertainty about what's going to happen. Organisations don't know what's going to happen when the government turns off the tap. So, what we've seen and experienced is that employees who otherwise wouldn't have taken advantage of those weaknesses and controls are doing so. Yeah,
that reminds me of the conversation I had with the CEO and the CFO of a company, she was actually the Chief Risk Officer of the company, looking to engage with us about doing a fraud risk management review. And during that meeting, she turned to the CEO and said, well, my integrity is only good for 24 hours. And the CEO leant back and I leant back, because it was an amazing comment for her to make, which was the elephant in the room. And it's something that you and I will know that a good employee today can turn bad tomorrow if the right factors have occurred. There could be a drug dependency that's been built up, or a family member has become very ill and they need money. So there's all sorts of factors that can play into it. But it was an interesting comment.
And I think the other interesting thing is that the amount, gambling, is at all-time highs. The betting agencies are all-time high revenues. And when you think about that in the context of what you're saying around, I'm only good for 24 hours. Come tomorrow, you might have a dependency.
That's right. Yeah, and you need to prepare for the worst and hope for the best is really the maxim for that. But when you talked about before the fraud triangle, and let's maybe touch on the opportunity side of it. And the opportunity side of it is a really interesting discussion point, because in our experience, what we've seen in organisations is that there are always opportunities for someone to commit fraud. It could be a financial reward, it could be theft of intellectual property. There's a number of things that people can do. Most people won't exploit that opportunity, but they also may not report that potential exploit within the organisation. I think that is a really key area that, particularly now when every dollar matters, that organisations think about maybe they need to be reviewing their control environment.
Yeah.
For example, we've done some work in the financial services sector where we were tasked to go in, review the control environment and identify ways that fraud could be committed. And one of those jobs resulted in over a 2-week exercise where they had about 15 risks, and the highest risk of a fraud being perpetrated was $100 million. And that was agreed to by the most senior executives in the organisation. But they only knew that because they decided to test it to see how does this control environment work in the real sense, not just on paper.
Yeah. And another way that our clients are engaging with us to try and identify those risks is that proactive data analytics.
Yeah.
For example, be it around credit card spend, are there particular individuals or particular business units that have got particularly high expenditure? Has there been a spike during COVID? Can you explain that? Are there multiple payments of invoices? Are there particular suppliers that are getting paid over and above what the purchase orders are, the limits are? Those types of things that we've experienced with our clients of late. And some clients have actually appreciated the no fine, no fee type scenario that we do, like you touched on in the every dollar counts environment. Going into an organisation where if we don't find anything, there's no fee for doing so. But inevitably, there's always something that we can identify, even if it is a duplicate payment, which is just a mistake, or on the other end of the spectrum where there's actually malicious conduct, where people are actively seeking to misappropriate money from the organisation. So I think that's probably something that we're going to see more and more of, is organisations looking to find ways to stem the flow of cash. And I mean, thinking back to 2008, the amount of misconduct that was revealed once the tide went out, and we're sort of in a similar sort of environment now. Are things going to get worse? And I would suggest they probably would. And when the tide goes out, all the misconduct's going to come to the fore. So it's happening now. It's just whether organisations actually want to look internally and try and identify it.
Yeah, this new working regime has created, and it is creating, new opportunities. So organisations are grappling around the compliance piece, the control environment, and you don't know what you don't know, and those risks, unless they're addressed proactively, they could remain unseen, and you don't know when that missile is going to be launched and land on your doorstep. And it's a real issue for organisations.
And also think with staff being decentralised, there's less oversight, and I think that presents a risk where managers and execs would have had some oversight of what people were doing, or particular processes that enabled people just to interact freely, like in the office environment, because that's not happening now. I think there's an increased risk in that regard as well.
Yeah. The only difference, frauds don't change that much. It's just the medium by which it's done, and new software, new types of IT infrastructure create new opportunities. But at the end of the day, money's got to move from A and get to B, and how do they do that? So the interesting thing for us is it's so dynamic now with the IT and applications that are available that you always see a similar fraud but perpetrated in a slightly different way, and always the characters are slightly different.
Yeah. So you touched on the characters. What are some of the traits, or what are some of the red flags that you've sort of come across in your experience around identifiers of fraud?
People that don't like to be questioned about their work product. They could be, normally at that very senior level, if they've got a dictatorial style management, there's a lot of nepotism within the organisation, and people know that an individual has only hired cronies around him or her. That's a big red flag.
I've also seen where staff won't take holidays.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where they've got like large leave balances. They don't like taking leave because someone might come into their role, perform their duties, and actually identify it. We've seen numerous cases of that, and that's actually something that we actively look for when we're doing this. The proactive fraud risk management work. I think the other sort of red flag is around those thresholds. People have particular approval limits, and people within the organisation know it. So it might be 50,000 doesn't need a signature, or 100,000 only needs one signature. So looking around those particular thresholds where people are trying to stay under the radar is another way where we've seen sort of a lot of that take place. And just thinking back to a fraud that we uncovered was there was a materiality limit around 50,000. That was the threshold. Yeah. And we saw a whole heap of invoices around that $49,000 mark, and not surprisingly, it was from the same supplier. So when you dug into it, it was actually the cost of the project was $500,000, but it had been broken down into multiple purchase orders and invoices to circumvent the process and get it to that higher threshold. So, that again is a really great red flag for identifying fraud.
And that goes back to your point around data mining, data analytics, where you can do something proactive, and it's not going to cost the earth, but you can get that comfort level around the performance of the organisation, and whether those thresholds are perhaps, or those delegation thresholds are perhaps being bypassed through other means. I think that's been a really interesting conversation, Scott. Yeah. Thanks for joining today.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone online for joining.
Yeah, I hope you got something out of it. And if you did want to have a discussion, please feel free to contact myself or Scott, and happy to have a conversation with you and see how we can assist. Bye for now.
Thanks.